Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Future of Wealth Transfer, Strategies for Engaging Women and Next-Gen Donors. Today with us, we have Milan from Giving Compass, as well as Dr. Sara Konrath from the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. We'll also be joined at the end by our special guest, Kim Ledger, who is the DAF Giving Summit MC and REN's SVP of Complex Assets. Just a couple housekeeping items before we get started. If somebody could just let me know that you're able to hear us there in the questions, that would be great. All right, great, thank you. And I also just wanted to let you all know that we are going to be recording this webinar. So for anybody that wants to view it at the end, you should get an email with the recording. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Milan and Dr. Sara Konrath.
Thank you so much, Mona, and thank you for driving this session for us. Hello, everyone. My name is Milan Ball. I'm the Director of Development and Partnerships for Giving Compass Network. I'm so excited to be joining you today for a conversation on engaging women and next-gen donors, and I'm joined by Dr. Sara Konrath of the IU Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. We're going to take a second and just let Dr. Konrath give her own introduction, and we'll just kick it off with some research.
Hi, everyone. I'm glad you could be here. And I'm here not only in my role from the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy to present some research, but I'm also proud to say that I'm a scientific advisor for Giving Compass, and I've enjoyed working with the wonderful team there. So we'll be presenting some research from Giving Compass as well today.
Yeah, so if you're not familiar with Giving Compass, we are a donor education platform that exists to give rise to inclusive philanthropy, more inclusive philanthropy. And so with that, we believe that donors who know more do more, and our education platform is built with almost 40,000 pieces of donor education content that's been syndicated. Something we're very proud to have released earlier this year is actually our Guide to Good platform, which is one of the only AI agents that in existence that's trained on the philanthropic sector. And so a lot of the knowledge that we house is in collaboration with some incredible content partners. All of our content is vetted, and we use that in an AI forum that allows donors to guides donors through their journeys. And we operate with the highest standards of equity, transparency, accountability, and effectiveness. And that's just a high level, breakdown of what it is that we do, what it is that we're excited about. And to give you a bit more context of what we bring to the table for this discussion, what do we have to say about DAFs? Well, we actually published some research in September in partnership with Dr. Konrath, led by Maddie Allegri on our team, who is phenomenal. And so, Mona, if you want to just get us started, I'm going to tell you all about that research. So we launched a report on donor satisfaction and unlocking public sector funding from DAFs. We know in the DAF landscape that the average DAF donor has a household income of roughly 1.3 million. And the second part of that research is exploring the participants of that study. And so we looked at DAF donors and we asked them, did you recently give from your DAF, explored the percentages of that. Although this session focuses more on women and next-gen donors, part of what makes this research so exciting and interesting for our team is that there are a lot of testimonials and qualitative information that came from it from women DAF donors that's going to drive a lot of this conversation. Mona, we can jump to the next slide. Thank you. So in terms of key impact, one of the key questions that we had asked in this research, well, what does an impactful donation mean to you? So for DAF donors, the majority of those answered, the donation contributes to impact. And, it might be intuitive that you want a donor, donors are going to look for impact, but in this group, you want to see that people's lives are improving. We also want to see a development of, advancing of a nonprofit's mission and that mission alignment. And this is one of the key themes that we were, just really excited to pull from. Additionally, we want donations to contribute to long-term change. And Sara, I'm just going to ask, because you did play an advisory role in some of this, at any point, if you want to just jump in, because this really is a conversation about these talking points, you are more than welcome to.
Thank you. I will when I see something to jump in for.
No, awesome. So what I'm going to do, because I think that some of this data some of this qualitative data is so important, and I want to be able to quote quote some of these donors. On my screen, it's a little bit blurry. I don't know if it's blurry for yours, but I'm going to zoom it out and just bear with me for a second. I'm going to read some of these anonymous insights because I just think that they're that valuable. I am going to also encourage you all to take a look at the report. We'll have a QR code on each page that towards the end and on the pages as they first appear. But this anonymous female donor who was age 55, she mentioned that impact means to me that it has some systemic or human effect that changes something. Impact means change. So things don't just continue as they are, but how does my donation make an impact? One of the next key themes, Mona, you can go ahead and click to the next slide, is actually on the subject of proximity. And with proximity, we found that a lot of DAF donors are interested in more local versus national giving. What we also found is that, in this case, this anonymous female donor who was age 69 said, I try to give locally if I can, and in that way I can see where my impact is. And so we're still kind of tying back to that core value of impact, but proximity does play a role. And so 81% of donors said that they were more likely to also give to an organization recommended by a family member or friend. So proximity is not only just about locality and geography, but it's also about how familiar a cause or issue an organization is to that donor. The next key insight that was explored in the report is around trust and transparency. So we can move to the next slide that covers that, and reactions after watching the video. So what you'll gather from covering this report is that what we did was essentially we introduced DAF donors to, we gave them the option of giving to an organization that they found and were familiar with, or when introduced to a new organization, when presented with video content, if they were more likely to give to that organization because of that. I see we've got a little bit of a clearer screen for me, so that's exciting. All right, so this staff donor who is a female, age 42, she said, I felt more of a connection to this organization and I felt more likely to donate than I did before watching the video because I know about what to do, why they do it, and what they do, why they do it, and who's involved. And again, we see that trend of being able to ascertain impact, and then a creation of proximity. And so the reason why I'm sharing all these highlights, and we'll kind of explore later when we talk about practical approaches, but it's a really great fundamental baseline to build strategies around partnering with your DAF donors and clients. We can move on to this last slide, which is another wonderful qualitative statement that I think is really helpful to think about the perceptions of DAF donors. This anonymous donor, who's female, age 47, she said, I donated to a small nonprofit in my community that helped young persons of color who were at a writer's workshop trying to get their material published. I inherited my DAF from my mom, who passed last year. She herself had been an artist, and that gave up up to raise children, and she wanted to help young artists and people starting out. She was also the child of immigrants, so she really cared about immigrant communities and immigrant experiences and the storytelling of immigrants. So it seemed a really good match with her wishes, and so that was why I picked it. My mom was elderly and she was in declining health, but her death was still somewhat of a surprise. I think that we were not expecting her to go quite so soon. So I'm sort of looking for ways to honor her and her wishes. I spent a lot of time talking about these testimonials because I think although it is, incorporated into a research report, it is so important to really explore donor motivations. And I think putting language to what these motivations are and humanizing that conversation is incredibly important. It's one of our, values, to focus on these sorts of conversations. And so this is where I'm going to pivot us a little bit. And Sara, you've done a lot of research on donor motivations and empathy, and I would love for you to share a bit more about one of your studies on why people give. And so I'm going to hand it off to you.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, it was interesting to hear your thoughts, hearing the qualitative perspective and people's voices, because it really does align with what we found using numbers, using quantitative data. If we could shift to the next slide. We're going to be, next slide, please. We're going to talk about donor motivations. And so what we've done, it might be blurry for you to see, but I'll just verbally share, and you'll all get copies of the slides if there's issues with them, or regardless. But what we have done is developed a framework for why people give. So we just listened to donors and we came up with the top reasons why they say that they give to nonprofits. And the way to remember it is a taste for charity. So that's an acronym. And you mentioned trust, it was important. And you also mentioned social motivations, like giving because somebody close to you cares about a cause. And so those two came up as important. But the number one thing that came up was altruism. So just giving because you care, because you want to make that impact. So again, you covered those different motivations that we also found. And people also sometimes say they give because they're thinking about taxes, because somehow also for egoism, that they're going to benefit in some way. And also sometimes people say, even though we ask them, why do you give? Some people said, well, we don't give because we feel a sense of constraint. But that's a tricky one there, because I think that's coming with a certain mentality, a scarcity type of mentality, because like any of us can give, even if we have very little, we can all give in our own way, whether money or some other way of giving. So that one we kind of flagged as being some surprising results with that one. It's not what you'd always expect. But anyway, that's the sort of framework, the taste framework. And you can read more about it in our salon.com article. And then we then looked at, after we developed the framework, we then looked at a national sample of Americans, and a third of them were actually high income, so high net worth people. And we were able to look at gender, income, and age, and how that was related to the taste framework. We found that with gender, actually men and women were really similar in their motivations for giving, with the only difference we saw was that men were more attuned to taxes as a motivation. With income, now, I thought this was really important because the high income donors, I think sometimes we have stereotypes about what a high net worth person, what motivates them. And I think we should be really careful not to operate from those stereotypes. We should listen to them and we should look at data. And that's what we're doing today. And so what we found was that actually they have lower egoism motivations. So although sometimes we imagine that they want their names on buildings and that's the only motivation, in reality, those are the ones we pay attention to just because they're there, but there's many people behind the scenes who want to donate anonymously or who really genuinely care and are committed to the cause. We also find that the social motivation is really important for the higher net worth donors. They're really looking at what their friends and colleagues and neighbors and other people they know are doing. So that's a really interesting insight, I thought, from this report. And this is a published paper at this point, academic paper. And of course, not so surprising, they're saying they're motivated by taxes. So there's some strategy there. And also they are acknowledging that they have fewer constraints to giving. And when it comes to age, I'm going to shift into kind of a lot of different insights here with some published and unpublished data. So from the published paper, we find very few age differences, except younger people are saying that they are less motivated by egoism, by what they can get. Now, here we go, another stereotype, right? Thinking about young people, adults love to say things like young people are selfish or low in empathy. But in fact, my research in many domains is showing the very opposite. They're saying they're less motivated by egoism. And they're also saying, maybe this is surprising, they're less worried about constraints. Now, might be surprising because they might have less income. So, but that's what I'm saying is I think it's a mindset. I think it's really about a scarcity mindset, and you can have instead more of a generous or gratitude mindset, which will actually make you want to give. And so if you look at the right side of this slide, you'll see that we have a new paper that came out tracking young people in the US over time and finding that empathy is increasing in them. So since empathy is a number one reason for giving, we would expect to see a lot of generosity in young donors, in young people. And yet what we're seeing over time is actually decreases in more formal or institutional forms of giving. So if you look at trends that we have in national samples of high school seniors, tracking them since the late 1970s, we see declining charitable giving in most domains, with some exceptions. Environmental causes, issues around social justice or minority groups, and also international relief are exceptions that are making their way up and becoming of more interest over time to young people. And also this is unpublished. And then we also have some unpublished data I've never presented before. So here's the first place, and hopefully we can publish it someday in the scientific literature. But I thought this was really important to notice, like almost all young people were saying, these are teenagers saying that they're engaging in informal online helping behaviors in some form. So you can see they support influencers, they text friends, they're really empathetic, and empathy really needs an action to go with it. So those actions are happening and they're highly motivated to give and help. 90% of them are saying they're engaging in online activism activities, like signing petitions, speaking out about causes. There's many different forms of this. And I think this is really great news. But when you get to the more institutional, you're still seeing some engagement, but it's not as high. And I think that this represents a pathway. So if you know that there's a desire to give and that young people are really eager to help and really care, then how do you take them from a pathway of like just wanting to engage in some way to kind of a more formal engagement with organizations or with donor advised funds or any kind of more, I'd say, habitual way of giving, which I think is a nice practice. But you can still see they are volunteering in some ways online, and they define volunteering broadly. And they're also making online donations. About 60% of them, 59% are doing that, but it's not always to nonprofits specifically. It might be to a GoFundMe or some other informal way through their friend networks. So this is just to keep in mind that there's two stereotypes we can counter here. One, any stereotypes you might have about high net worth donors, please just be aware that the data say something different. And also when you listen to them, you listen to people who hold DAF accounts, there's going to be more complexity than you might expect. And there's a lot of goodwill. And with young people, I think that we always have those stereotypes, but we need to really understand what's happening in their lives and what are some constraints they're facing and how to tap into that deep generosity that they have.
Sarah, that's brilliant. And I love that you're kind of teasing out the concept of stereotypes and not, leaning into these misconceptions that we might have. The Lilly Family School Philanthropy had published phenomenal research with Bank of America. And we're going to get to that in a second, but I did want to also have you just speak a little bit to, if we can go to the next slide, Mona, this Wall Street Journal publication just on narcissism, because we mentioned ego and egoism, and I really would love for you to just in a couple minutes just talk through this and why it's so relevant.
Yeah, this is really relevant. So I think the idea is, I mentioned egoism because I think we defy stereotypes when we look at high income people and younger people as not being egotistically motivated. But yes, there are people out there who, people give for a variety of reasons. And there are people who give because they want to get things back. And so we have a whole separate line of research on narcissistic givers. These people exist. Obviously, narcissism does exist. It's about the personality disorder is about 1% of the population, but the everyday narcissist, we all know somebody and they're challenging. And I've talked to various people in the nonprofit world and heard some really tricky stories, and yet they also have some ways of supporting nonprofits and doing good for causes. And so in this one study that I review in the Wall Street Journal, we actually were able to measure people's narcissism right around the ice bucket challenge. And we actually found that the people who were most narcissistic were just posting the video. That's it. They just wanted to have that video out there. And then the people who were least narcissistic were only making the donation. They definitely didn't want the attention. They just wanted to help out. And I think, if you think about that, you actually need people who are going to share the good word and let people know what's happening out there. And regardless of this was such an amazing event. And I think people have been trying to bottle it since then. But it's kind of a way to think about, well, how do you work with just your donor exactly where they're at, non-judgmentally, and just say, what do they have to offer? What's motivating them? And how can we do good together?
That's brilliant. Honestly, when we were kind of preparing for this, I was like, this has to work into the presentation. I think it's something definitely worth advisors doing a deep dive on, because we all kind of come to these conversations, whether it's with donors or our own personal experiences with giving. And we want to work back, especially as wealth is growing in the United States, and we're understanding there are people that are coming into their wealth. Well, what do they care about? And that's really driving this conversation, namely with as we are focusing on women and on next-gen donors. Mona, we're going to jump to the next slide because I mentioned the Lilly Family School Philanthropy and Bank of America published this study of philanthropy in the 2023 edition, and it is Sarah and I agreed, it's a phenomenal wealth of knowledge. I think it's over 100 pages, but we did all the dirty work of reading it ahead of this conversation, but it's something that really anchors a lot of key insights on these two demographics that we're focusing on. What we want for you guys to take from this, there's going to be a lot of statistics that we're just going to talk through, things that stand out to us. And then after this piece, we're going to dive specifically into women donors, next-gen donors, and practical approaches for you working with clients to be able to, provide the best services possible, stay agile in your service offerings and whatnot. But from this slide, so what we know from the report is that about 60% of affluent donors reported that their primary motivation type was actually because they believe in the mission of an organization. Well, why is that important? How are these donors learning about the organizations, and how are you getting that information to them is something that's relevant for you as an advisor. And I'm speaking to advisors because we know that that's likely the majority audience, but if there are other researchers that or other members of the sector that wanted to chime in with any questions in the chat, I'm just going to make a reminder that we're going to circle back to that towards the end. But with that, this study is just pages and pages and pages of insights that you can pull out by race, gender, and age group, and a few other indicators. So Mona, we can go to the next slide. As we're focused on women donors, some key insights that were found in the report. So we know that women are estimated to inherit the majority of the $30 trillion of financial assets from the boomer generation by 2030. That's a McKinsey statistic. But what we gathered from the Bank of America study of philanthropy was that personal experiences were actually a driving factor for giving, specifically to women and girls causes for women. Again, you might think no-brainer, but that's a significant statistic when that is one of the, it's significantly underfunded cause area. We also know that women are significantly more likely to involve relatives in their relatives of other generations in their giving. So when we're talking about the transfer of wealth, we're really seeing that women are driving, what is at the disposal of the next generation in their families when talking about wealth. What vehicles are they using? What are they familiarizing themselves with as they're being introduced to, introduced to inheritance or introduced to, assets of any kind. We also know that women are more likely to rely on information from peers in their decision-making and impactfulness. And Sarah, you touched on this a little bit earlier. If you have anything to add to this note, that'd be fantastic. But it is interesting to think about who it is that we counsel or who it is that we invite into our giving decision-making process. It's not always just an advisor. And I think something that would be smart on behalf of advisors is to actually gauge who are the influential voices in your client's lives that you might be able to create a dialogue around understanding their causes better or why they're so deeply connected to something. I'm going to pause there, Sarah. Is there anything of those statistics that just stands out to you that you would want to tease out a little bit?
Yeah, just to say that our school also is really interested in women and girls causes and how women give. And we also see something similar here, that women are more likely to give in partnership with their spouse as well. So there's just this, it seems to be women are really find collaborative giving appealing and, are community minded in the way sort of who they're looking around to friends, family, their partner, whoever they trust, and they are making these decisions collectively. So I think that that's a really important insight. Just to realize that it's not really an independent mindset that they're operating with, like individual, individualist.
Right. It's a collective.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I also think in terms of the collectiveness and the knowledge that women are seeking to acquire, it's worth mentioning that women are also significantly more likely to report that community foundations are a source of information to support their giving, finding resources and just demonstrating a personal commitment to learning about the causes and organizations that they're wishing to care for. They reported, that they're more likely to do. They're also more likely to monitor the impact of their giving. And so there's layers of the amount of information that women want to acquire to make informed decisions. It's one of the reasons why I think tools like Giving Compass are a phenomenal resource for advisors to work with their clients to use, because it allows you to access unbiased information that's been curated with a lens of equity and effectiveness. And so that's just something I'm going to hammer down as, our partnerships lead obviously have to do that in this call. But it's just, where people are getting their information, how they're accessing that information, and what information is even available to them is just something very critical that we hope that you can take away from this conversation. I want to, in the interest of time, move us along a little further. So what I will say as like the tail end of or transitioning between women and next gen donors is that women were also indicated that they plan to leave larger percentages of wealth to their children and grandchildren compared to men. And I think that's a very significant thing to keep in mind, because we are talking about the transfer of wealth. For next gen donors, Sara, we saw, or we know that younger generations prioritize investments, but also giving opportunities that are closely aligned to their personal values. We also know that they're more likely to give towards global issues. And so where they stand in the world is in, an identity hat that we can put on and say, this is what matters to me. But as you've pointed out in the discussion around narcissism, it's that it's not so much about showing it off to people so much as it is about personal alignment. Would you agree? Yeah. And so
I would agree. Sorry, I was on mute. But yes, I would agree. And I love seeing this, because here we're focusing not just on the general trends that I was talking about amongst people of all different wealth backgrounds, but here we're talking about high net worth individuals.
Right. Right. One of the things that was interesting from this report is that they also found that younger donors were more likely to donate in different methods, which you also mentioned. And so the efforts such as impact investing and social impact investing is something that's far more practiced or requested of next gen donors. They also are more likely to donate closely held or non-publicly traded business interests, real estate, cryptocurrencies. So these are other methods. While we are focused on donor advised funds, it is interesting because younger donors are also seeking they're almost seeking very comprehensive portfolios around who they are, how they move in the world, and factoring in their charitability at every type of vehicle that they can have. Is there anything that you would want to add to that, Sara?
I would just say, let's say that's a generosity mindset. Okay. So they're operating with this generosity mindset, and it's like a lens. It's like my glasses, right? So they have this generosity mindset on, and it's going to affect however they see the world and the interactions they have in many different domains. So this is very important to them and their values, and we really need to pay attention to it.
Right. I think too, something also that we saw was that next gen donors are also more likely even in the context, in comparison to women, to find their information from the media and internet as a key demographic distinguishing factor, and also to determine the impactfulness of their giving. So next gen donors are, they're paying attention to impact, but in a different sense. What's at our fingertips, and thinking through, how do we measure our impact? It's another massive question, as we know that women are more likely to pay attention to it. When you are a woman and a next gen donor, as I have that hat on currently, I, personally, not to move away from the research, but thinking about, okay, what is the right method of doing this? And I think for advisors to bring it back home there is that, it is very much a partnership and open dialogue that you're going to have with clients to find out a personalized, curated plan that speaks to not only their personal mission and personal, experiences, but also to be aligned with creating the world that they want to see in the way that they, have the resources to do. Anything that you would want to add there, Sara?
I think you are speaking very well, and I love how we're seeing a lot of what we're seeing in like the general youth population is the high net worth donors are also expressing that with the resources and the capacity they have. So it's kind of cool to see the overlap there.
Right. Right. I think, too, one of the more interesting pieces from this data, and something I did not clarify, so younger generations in this study are defined by Gen Z and millennials and under. So I just wanted to make that distinction. But in terms of the wealth transfer, next-gen donors are significantly more likely to give more of a portion of a larger portion of their wealth to secular charities. So we know that religious giving is one of the largest, methods of giving when it comes to generosity. But secular charities, or just in general, non-religious organizations, there was just something about that I thought was interesting. I don't know if you had any insights.
Yeah, this is actually not surprising at all. Because I do research on trends in young people, and one big trend that people are really thinking about is the decline in religious participation, formal, institutional religious participation. And so if that is the biggest pie right now of donations, of individual giving, is to religious organizations. But over time, there's been a massive decline in young people like seeing themselves as religious. I think it's something like 40% of Gen Z sees themselves as not religious at this point. And it's been increasing over generations and expected to continue increasing. So I'm not surprised to see that, because I just think that's part of larger national trends.
Yeah, and we also know that giving is also going down. So it is great to know that we have vehicles like donor advised funds that are now rapidly growing in their use, and hopefully we can see a turn, if that's possible, in that. We're going to jump, Mona, to the next slide. And what we're going to do, everyone, is we're just going to cover some of the high-level key insights, some of these things we've mentioned, but wanted to give us a bit more time to talk around them. So another insight that was shared from the Study of Philanthropy report was that, challenges in giving. How are we mitigating challenges in charitable giving? If we know that giving is going down, if we know, all of these other factors in this data, well, a majority of the respondents in this study, or I shouldn't say majority, let me backtrack. That's bad practice to say majority. I'm laughing with you, Sarah. But respondents to this question had mentioned that they struggled with identifying what they care about and deciding what to donate to. We know at Giving Compass, because part of why we exist is to, not necessarily reduce the number of options, but make it less chaotic for people when they're going through their discovery journeys. There's a lot of information out there. I think 1.8 million charities, so, that you can access just in our platform alone and learn more about. But we also see that donors, want to understand how much they can afford to give. So tactically speaking, as an advisor, are you explaining, in-depth working and educating your clients on those aspects? Yes, probably. But, what layer of depth can you add? Can you provide a donor education experience? Do you need a service to be able to offer that, as a separate part of what it is that you do? How are you leveraging storytelling to guide your donors through the stories that they wish to tell? We know that donors want to be able to, measure their impact. Well, what sort of impact do they have to have? Do they want to have? What sort of stories, with their personal experiences, do they want to tie to their giving experiences and their generosity? One of the things that had come out of the Giving Compass report that we had talked about earlier is the motivations for donors and how video content was we demonstrated that video content increased donor trust in settings where they weren't already familiar with an organization. And so, maybe video content is part of how the storytelling to be able to educate donors on the organizations that they might want to partner with if they don't already know. And then also we saw volunteerism plays a very significant role for women and for Gen Z donors. And it is not just about, writing the check. It is about all-encompassing portfolio of a generosity mindset. It is, I want to be fully engaged with the organization. I don't just want to give, I want to show up. Or, in those discussions, it might be that your donor does not have immediate proximity to a cause, and volunteerism might not be a factor. So maybe it is working with an organization or bringing them examples of organizations where they can have a layered approach to their giving strategies that includes volunteerism. Sarah, anything that you wanted to add on this when it comes to mitigating challenges of charitable giving?
Well, just I love that you highlighted the role of volunteering, because I think we all have a constellation of ways that we love to give, and discovering that is really important. And it's kind of a process of self-discovery and self-awareness. And I think when we make this only about giving money, we're missing something. We're missing about all the different ways that we can experience the joy of giving, and by having that generosity mindset. So I think it's really important to think about volunteerism, but also practically and strategically. Volunteerism is usually step one to get in the door. And the number one predictor of donations is really that they already know your organization. They already feel comfortable. And so getting people more involved in nonprofits first often leads to charitable giving to that same organization. So it just seems like a very natural, I mean, it's a really relational approach of giving not just money, but giving yourself. And I've done some work on looking at what are the long-term effects of giving for the person who gives. And I've actually found that people who give their time live longer. And it's like a lovely thing to know that the ways that we share our time with others, whether it's in nonprofits or just the people we know, we actually can experience some health benefits. And other researchers find that when we're giving our money and donating our money, or sharing our money to our friends and people around us, we feel happier and we experience joy. So I like that we're kind of thinking more holistically about what giving really means, even in the context of DAFs, which are financial vehicles. But again, there are people behind them, and those people have psychologies and are really thinking and feeling and trying to understand how to make a difference in the world.
I love that statistic, and I'm going to take that and pocket it for future. I hope everyone in the audience is also taking notes on that one. I'm glad you guys are going to receive a recording of this. Mona, we're going to jump to the next slide, and we're going to start working through these a little bit more quickly so that we can at least get a couple minutes in to answer some questions. But other insights that we wanted to share were supporting charitable giving decision-making, considerations we would recommend, identify, and I mentioned this earlier, identify the influential people, places, and experiences in the donor's life that drive decision-making, being very intentional about that dialogue, tailoring services to impact-focused guidance that aligns with donor values, and then assisting donors with their discovery journey through trusted, unbiased platforms like Giving Compass. I think we can jump to the next slide. All right, and then navigating charitable giving vehicles. Obviously, we are joining here with the DAF Giving Summit, so we are going to focus on DAFs. But one of the considerations that we would offer is to become adept in tax implications, regularly updating your knowledge. There is legislation changes that are on the horizon. We want to stay in tune with all of these different shifts that are happening. Also for next gen donors and for conversations of inheritance, we want to be able to particularly knowledgeable on tax deferred accounts, Roth conversions, and then life insurance even. In addition to that, we want to say follow the rising impact of the rise of impact investing, ESG funds, making firm level social responsible strategies so that your donors that are already within your network are retained and believe in what it is that you're doing, and that there's an ethical lens involved in it, an equitable lens. And so those are just some high level things that we'd add in terms of navigating charitable giving vehicles. We can jump to the next slide. All right, some other considerations. So addressing donor education motivation. So again, that's just identifying desired effectiveness, including volunteer opportunities we covered when possible to increase the proximity to causes, leveraging donor trust, and trusted resources, really just, it is an expansion of your relationship if it's not something that's already included in the offerings that you have. And so I think these, this dialogue and also especially for what we've seen and know of the data of women and how they interact multi-generationally, creating opportunities where families can be involved is something that is, remarkably important. We can jump to the last slide, which highlights those recommended strategies specifically for building relationships, understanding donor motivations, and then creating impactful experiences. Sara, if there's anything that you topically would want to add to what we have here, I kind of summarized them in the last couple of slides, but wanted to leave room if there's anything that you wanted to share.
This has been so great. I've really enjoyed our conversation, but I'd really love to hear also from everyone who's here and see what our listeners think.
All right, let me see if I can jump into our chat and see what questions might have dropped. Okay, so I see there's 12. I see 12 questions here. Oh, a bit more. Bear with me, guys. All right, so one of the questions was, how are you defining high net worth? So this came in a bit earlier. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure which study this was.
Well, I can say that there's two big studies that we did that talk about high net worth. So one was the Bank of America study, and I believe they had it was at least, I think, 250,000 income and I think 1 million in wealth. That's just from my memory, but the report itself, which is free to download, will tell you that specifically. And as for my new paper on high net worth motivations for giving, that was because we did a large national sample and also had other purposes for the study, we were able to just ask one question, and we asked about income. And so this was defined, I believe, as 200,000 or above. So there are various definitions of this, and I think it would be important for future consideration to include not just income, but also wealth. And so that's obviously something that we are paying attention to.
Brilliant. There's a really interesting question from Rachel Perlman. It says, despite evidence of less egoism in high net worth donors, which is great, would you say that giving to friend recommended organizations can imply narcissism, since it can improve social worth within certain social circles? How does event giving play into ego and narcissism among donors?
I think that's a really great question. And actually, I'm usually really careful about how I respond. So I can tell you, I don't know of any research that's looked at event giving and narcissism. And so I can't really speak to the science behind that. But I can say that I think I try to be careful not to make assumptions about people and about their motivations. Let them speak for themselves, or notice behaviors that might indicate something. There are ways to kind of infer motivations. But I wouldn't want to just assume it, because I think there can be cases where people are at events for very altruistic reasons, and they're trying to bring in people in their network because they really want those people to share their resources with an organization with high needs that can make a high impact in the community. And of course, there are also people who might go to those events because they want to wear their cute cocktail gown and show off their new hair, whatever. I mean, there's so many different reasons. Humans we're complicated, and the same person can also have multiple motivations, right? But I guess my overall point about motivations is, and including about narcissism, is we're not here to judge people's motivations. We're here to figure out how can we understand people well so that we can do the most good. That's the way I see this work, and what makes me want to do the work. Because it's otherwise, I mean, I believe we need the donations from people who are more narcissistic and more altruistic. It's just that it might be more challenging to navigate something if you don't understand that the person is coming in with an egotistical motivation. Then there might be more conflict or just problems in negotiating that relationship.
That's brilliant. I really loved that question, so thank you for asking.
It's a great question. Yes.
So Gina asked, what role do you see DAFs playing in engaging with organizations and actively seeking funding requests, acting as co-creators in solutions alongside grantees, acting as the bridge between clients and grantees beyond donor education? That is another really great question. That's a big question. So I think what we're learning, and Giving Compass, we partner with 3 of the largest DAF managers, DAF providers, and a lot of our research is really driven by these sorts of questions. It's something that I would say that we're still exploring and looking to put out more, looking to continue to develop research on. As far as deafs playing a role in engaging with organizations, I think there's absolutely an opportunity. We're seeing a lot of community foundations that are managing deafs, and we are also working with community foundations in a couple pilots to understand those dynamics and what offerings we can provide. I'm sorry that I don't have a fuller answer for you, Gina, but I would say those are, two areas where I'm seeing, the larger institutions are really tapped into these, modernized solutions and being able to offer their advisors at firms resources to be able to better engage with their donors. And then similarly, we're seeing that with community foundations. And then I think we are close to time, and I wanted to make sure that the Wren team was able to close us out. So I'm sorry that we couldn't get to all of the questions that are here, but you guys are phenomenal, and I love that we were able to capture a few of them. But Mona or Kim, if you want to jump back in. All right. We did have a couple of calls to action. So we did link all of the research at the end of this slide. So once you all receive this recording, you can either jump in with a QR code, or you can just download directly from the links. But thank you. We will also be at the Deaf Giving Summit in Nashville. So feel free to flag down the Giving Compass team. There'll be a couple of us there.
Great. Thanks so much, you guys. That was great information. Hi, everybody. I'm Kim Ledger, and I look forward to seeing you. You've probably heard by now that we are just 2 weeks away from kicking off that 2024 Deaf Giving Summit in Nashville. Last year, we heard your great feedback about the event, and we've designed a program with several new exciting things in store this year, including new opportunities to learn and connect with the Deaf Giving Summit community. This year, we've also introduced sector circles, which will give you the opportunity to engage in moderated, off-the-record conversations with peers in your sector of the donor advice fund space, as well as deep dives, which will also deliver more advanced content. We also have new content tracks this year. So today's webinar gave you a sample, and it was a great webinar, gave you a sample of what you'll hear about in our Navigating the Future of Wealth track, which will equip you with strategies to meet the unique and evolving needs of women and the next generation donors. We'll also be exploring family office dynamics and requirements, and inspiring you with dynamic TED Talk style presentations on topics that will change the trajectory of deafs and philanthropy over the next decade. We hope to see you there. Be sure to visit our website at deafgivingsummit.com, subscribe to our email list, and follow us on LinkedIn to be sure you get updates. So thanks everyone for joining today's webinar, and a big thank you to Milan and Sara for joining us today. As Mona mentioned earlier, this webinar was recorded, and you should receive the recording email in the next day or two. Have a wonderful rest of your week.